The Obama administration has reversed a long-standing U.S. policy to deny presidential condolence letters to families of soldiers who have committed suicide. The move came after a group of senators, 10 Democrats and 1 Republican, asked President Obama to change what they call the insensitive policy of neglecting families of military suicide victims. The president said he agreed to make the change in hopes of removing the stigma associated with the mental health costs of war. In a written statement, Obama said, quote, "This issue is emotional, painful, and complicated. But these Americans served our nation bravely. They didn't die because they were weak, and the fact that they didn't get the help they needed must change." Roughly a fifth of troops who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan experience anxiety, depression, and other mental health problems. Service member suicides have increased as some troops serve repeated tours of duty and suffer post-traumatic stress. For the second year in a row, the U.S. military has lost more troops to suicide than it has to combat in Iraq and Afghanistan.
The new presidential condolence letter policy went into effect this month. It will not retroactively apply to families who lost their loved ones before the change. Mental health and troop advocacy groups welcome the change, but they note the new policy will apply only to troops who commit suicide in officially designated combat zones, namely in Afghanistan and Iraq. They say those who die outside combat zones should also be recognized and that more should be done to prevent suicide among service members. The presidential letter condolence policy had been under review by the White House since 2009. Many military families had pushed for the change. Democracy Now! Broke this story in 2009 when we interviewed the parents of Chancellor Kiesling, a U.S. soldier who took his own life during his second tour of duty in Iraq. Chance's parents, Greg and Janet Kiesling, are joining us again today from Indianapolis, Indiana, from the PBS station WFYI. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! I, in writing to Greg, offered my bittersweet congratulations on this victory that you have worked so hard over the last few years to achieve, this change of the presidential condolence letter policy. Janet, what are your feelings today?
It's really bittersweet for us. It's been an exhausting night and day, just so much happening. And but I really am appreciative for the president's change in this policy, although I hope and pray that no family will receive a letter anytime soon.
Greg, can you tell us about what happened to Chance? Tell us your son's story.
Well, Chancey was signed up for the military in 2003, joined the Army. He signed up for 4 years as an enlisted soldier, and that also includes 4 years as a reserve soldier. And so he was trained for the rebuilding of Iraq, and he was a combat engineer and trained. He operated big equipment, and he loved to run the big equipment. And so, but finally, he was retrained as a tactical gunner sitting on top of a Humvee, and because there was really very little rebuilding going on. And he got deployed in '06. You know, did a good job. Was over there. Toward the end of his first deployment, his marriage broke up, and it was a very emotional time for him. And so, but he got through that. His battle buddies recognized he was in trouble and gave us 2 more years with our son. And so he left the, completed his enlistment, left the enlisted Army, but then became a reserve. And in April of '09, he got called up as a reservist soldier and died shortly thereafter.
And he shared with you his feelings about returning back to Iraq, and could you talk about that as well?
Yeah, we had a very detailed conversation. He and I were driving, and I just said, "Chance, you don't have to go. You've got other options." And he said, "Dad, this is my duty. I've made a commitment to this. I'll be fine. I can handle this." And so we thought he was going to be okay when he went on this deployment. What we subsequently found out is that the American Portability Act prevents any battlefield trauma from your enlisted time being transferred to your reserve period of service. So his commanders, none of his battle buddies, nobody knew. And as we learned from General Casey in a letter in late '09, that it was Chance's responsibility to tell his new unit. And we thought that was a crazy responsibility to put on a young soldier. But
Greg,
he
just
did his duty.
just a
He went
question.
over
When he first came back from Iraq and knew he needed a lot of help, mental health counseling, his life he was feeling was falling apart. The Army offered him a bonus of something like $27,000, and he said no, he just needed to stay home and heal.
They wanted first they wanted him to re-enlist because they needed soldiers, so he offered, I think, $17,000 to re-enlist. He turned that down, and then when he became a reservist, they were needing soldiers to go back earlier than the 2 years. He was supposed to be given 2 years after leaving the enlisted Army before he could be redeployed as a reservist, and so they offered him $27,000 to go back earlier, and he turned that down as well. And he did get healthy. In 2008, it was a great year. He got a job, a new girlfriend, and things seemed on the upbeat, and we were hopeful the war would be ending before he got redeployed.
And of course, as you have heard, not only the tragedy with your son, but so many other soldiers, the suicide rates in Afghanistan and Iraq, and in general, the suicide rates among veterans. There was a report from the Veterans Department in 2010 that 30 suicides are attempted each day by Army veterans, and 18 of them are successful. As many as 18 American veterans every day are committing suicide. And your sense of the government in this decision by President Obama recognizing that these are not acts of weakness by folks, but actually deep problems that the military needs to deal with, and has to recognize the service of these men and women.
Yeah, we've been at war for 10 years in this country, and the wounds are very, very deep. And I think changing the presidential condolence policy, it's become such a big story in the country because it's a small relief valve of the stress that soldiers and their families are feeling. And I think President Obama has done the right thing. I think it's going to send a powerful message throughout all of the military ranks to take the suicide training more seriously, to begin to destigmatize seeking help, to understand that PTSD is the signature wounds of these wars, and to better understand how the brain works, and that we can understand PTSD. And I think finally, the policy change says to every single soldier in the military, look out for your battle buddy.
Janet, when you and Greg went to Dover to receive the body of Chancellor, your son, as it was sent home from Iraq, a military officer came up to you to tell you that you should do something about this, talk to you about his alarm. Can you explain what happened there on the tarmac?
You know, everything happened so quickly, and I think I was just such in a state of shock. And I think for me, this past 2 years has been an education. A lot of what was happening in the military, we weren't even aware of it. And even though my son, you know, did call home a couple of times and said we've lost somebody recently, I had no idea it was of such magnitude. I had no idea that so many of these young people were attempting to take their lives or taking their lives on a daily basis. So this is why we have really, even though it's our very personal story and it's extremely painful, we knew it was the right thing to do. We needed to bring this in the open. Even though we have endured some criticism, we've also endured so much wonderful support from the citizens of the United States, and we're so ever grateful.
Yeah.